morning all, Randi Green here, a little update for today. It is November 9th and it is 2024. And I'm putting this out now because after January 20th, we don't know how the world is going to look. I want to put one thing in for those of you who have eyes to see with and ears to hear with. Be very cautious of what is being said and what the real intention is. We're dealing with various degrees of deception on all fronts. Just so you know, there is no good or bad in this one, or there is a bad and really bad. So just be very, very much aware of the deception that is being played out now worldwide. Learn to see through the words of the world leaders, and I'm including everyone in this little talk here. But most prominently, someone who's going to change the concept of the Western world backwards in time to a different era, which will evolve souls that for a long time have been very eager to push humanity back into what we call a different type of system where things were more ordered in the manner that they could administer. And I'm picking my words very, very careful here. I will give a hint though, if you want the more details of what is similar or could potentially happen. And that's Margaret Atwood in her Handmaid's Tale. And these are the typical, we have seen it all over the world when governments are overturned that belong to one faction or the other. The next faction that comes, even though they promise and their word sounds liberating, is not always the liberation we're hoping for. It is a liberation from the old, but what comes instead? And that's why you need to be on your toes now. So with that said, don't take words for what they appear to be. Learn to see the energetic intention behind. Learn to see the beings behind the people that are there and not just take the glamour and the dazzling and the overlay as this is what it truly is. Words are cheap. Promises are cheap. What are the outcome of these promises? We've seen that over and over and over again with world leaders. How they use rhetoric to get what they want. They use it so they can get in office. And once they're in office, they will play it out as they really intended it. And they have not been, quote unquote, lying, but they have been using a rhetoric that was what does it really mean? It can go both ways. But since most people are not schooled in rhetoric, they are not schooled in oratory tricks and the ways that speeches can be made to grant a certain outcome. They are just thinking, oh, he's saying, she's saying this or that or whatever, and that must mean this or that or whatever, because they're projecting their own hopes onto the orator. They're not really listening to what the orator is saying. They are listening to what they hope the orator is saying. So this is the great wake-up call that will set things in motions. It will probably take 2 or 3 years before it really begins to dawn. But there's also the other factor, and that is we have a very, very large portion of what I used to call military projects that are engineered to back up what is unfolding now on our planet. With that, we understand that there are now coming new groups in, and that means whatever used to be here will now change profoundly. Again, this is some of the things I'm going to talk about in the webinar, and I know I'm already revealing some of the things right now, but that's because when I get to the webinar, I would like to talk about things in a manner that are because it will be on December 7th, then it will be more, okay, we have now, things have settled a little bit. Who has come in? What does that mean in terms of our energy work? So here I'm just doing the base program For those of you who are still ingrained into it and has not understood that you are now under very different types of collective programs that are administering the way you are thinking and feeling right now. And that means that once people buy into an idea, they get scooped up by the collective waves or the programs that are running right now to allow for the next groups to come in. So that has been in the making for a very, very long time, going all the way back to Atlantis. So with that said, just putting it in there, because I'm not going to talk much about this, because I'm just giving the warnings here now. This is exactly what was anticipated for those of us who have had eyes to see with and ears to hear with and been in contact with the other realms. A lot of the old critters, as I said, have left. And that means there is a gap. And when there's a gap, something comes in and fills it up. What does that mean for my energy system right now? How is that recalibrating itself with what has happened collectively? Okay. So for those of you who've gotten so far with the body elemental combines the biofield, the emotional field. It is the energetic entity that grows out of your emotional mental field and biofield at time when you're in your womb. It's connected to the astral barrier that runs the programs that quote unquote controls the human physiology, emotions, mentals, and biofield within this lifetime. It is a raw, rudimentary type of energetic parasite. It is a kind of slug. It is connected to our peripheral nervous system and central nervous system and the core of the cells. And you know, I've talked about this in the transition sciences as well as in the advanced work with the emotional field. The body elemental, as you know, will reappear once you have cleared out most of your emotional patterns of this life. Then you'll get to the root of what runs your quote-unquote ego structure in this life. And that's the body elemental. The body elemental is your ego sense of self in this life. So that means it runs your emotions, it runs your thoughts, it runs the way your body works. So if something is not working well, then it's the body elemental that is connected to this lifetime. By moving with that, the rudimentary level of it is it's technically the inner child. And that means it's not a particularly advanced type of technology. It is connected to the astral barrier, but only within this time frame. It is connected to different types of entities and technology in the timeline that we are connected to, alongside with codes and different types of Q programs and whatnot. I talk about this in the advanced clearing work, how to deal with these things. So that's where you get that in the whole academy courses, where you look that up and get that for free. Okay. So we get rid of the body elemental, and that means we can begin to break down the current structure of self we have in this lifetime. It runs us pretty hard, so to speak. It's the one that generates fear. It's the one that responds to different electrochemical processes, as in it responds to different types of energies and ignites different types of electrochemical processes we interpret as emotions or feelings. And with that, the difference is emotions are just a raw electrochemical response mechanism in the body. The feelings and the interpretation we have when we put our narrative from the mind onto the emotional response mechanisms. So the first step of the work is, of course, to learn to control our mind in mindfulness, blank slate it, so to speak, so we're not thinking a lot of stuff, and then go in and work with the emotional patterns so that they no longer produce quote-unquote feelings that are energetic patterns with narratives and accumulated patterns of previous behavior within them. And often in the core of that is a little energetic parasite. Once we get that cleared out, then we can just go back into observing the emotions as electrochemical processes. And yes, it's easier said than done, but that is the trick of both where meditation comes in, because there you learn to silence your mind and observe, which is very helpful. There are, of course, certain emotions where things are still very difficult you can still observe it, but it's not necessarily something you can administer in a more conducive way, such as anger. If there is anger, anger must find its way, but it can't just go and grow and become a new pattern. So that's the whole trick if we could call it that, with emotions, is that the emotions must be there. They are electrochemical processes to inputs or experiences that either comes from inside or comes from outside. They are kind of imprinting, and they kickstart this. And the majority that kickstarts it into an interpretation is actually the body elemental. So if the body elemental is gone, then it's just the raw energy that's there, the electrochemical processes that we, if we do get connected to what we call our own original holographic energetic structure, can begin to observe with awareness, just to begin with. Not through the lenses of the ego, perceptions, narratives, different types of belief systems, and the world should be this or that or whatever, but through awareness, the raw awareness. And that comes in once the body elemental is gone. There are still the emotional patterns in the field, but they are no longer kind of responded to via the body elemental or the ego structure. And that means that we can observe it with awareness, but it can still take place, especially if there are older patterns that are more ingrained, that comes from previous lifetimes. Okay, so I was saying, I just paused it a little bit there, older ingrained emotional patterns or patterns of experience, let's call it patterns of experience to differentiate between the emotional patterns of this life from the experiences of this life, as well as with what we call the experiences of previous lifetimes that are so crystallized and ingrained into our emotional field that it keeps it stuck as a foundation, a subconscious foundation that is very difficult to get to unless you begin to work with your past lives. Now, the astral barrier is now completely breaking down due to the incoming groups that are not interested in that form of administration of the collective, as it were, of the old world order. These technologies, as you know from my book, The Souls of Humanity, were put there as part of the administration of the enclosure so that humanity, instigated some 15,000 years ago, would create distortion that would prevent them to get access to the true levels of this reality where they were residing in what was left of the original solar system configuration, where we would be in an enclosure of what we could call a cocoon of distortion, of which the astral barrier would be linked to the emotional field and the frequency fence would be connected to the mental field, controlling how we are thinking and how we are feeling. So that's how it was to begin with. That's how they created the enclosure. And we're in there and we're keeping it up by the way we're thinking, by the way we're feeling. And when we talk to the different extraterrestrial groups that have been here, they have, first and foremost, the grace. They try to make the event program an artificial overlay reality, which is breaking down, as you know. But it's still functional enough so that the parallel universal matrix races can keep up their hybrid programs inside this reality. And it's technically mostly engineered for them. The rest of us, we were kind of cocooned in different ways via different forms of genetic technology through 2019 until 2022. And you know exactly what I'm referring to here if you got a little bit of wits and understanding. And that administered to people, 70% of the human population, give or take, into a new type of exit program, so to speak, where things are now just breaking down slowly. And we're seeing that with people that chose to get painted blue. So that's how that one works. And no, I'm not talking about politics here. That's me. That's my code word for specific things. I cannot mention by its name, but it's you know exactly what I'm talking about. And hopefully, and if you're associating it with what is now going on, then you can see how your mind naturally associate colors with different types of things. So I could say whoever chose to get painted with a specific type of holographic energetic genetic overlay due to different types of fears that were fear of death or fear of disease or fear of whatever, that choose to do that in the hope that it would prevent them from getting a specific disease, with then getting into another program where they are now on what we call the exit route. So that's a pretty big portion of humanity. The main group that are being affected by what they chose to do are part of what we call the humans within our program that came here as part of the colonization, the extraterrestrial colonial programs that are human inside this program, but when you call and look at their soul structure, the majority of them have a large portion of either insectoid or avian types of genetics. And the groups that are coming in now from the 8th dimension, and they are not particularly interested in the lower level end of the 4th dimension. So they began that cleaning out process. So now we're beginning to get the pieces back in play. How did they break down what was left of the old world order? Well, that happened between 2019, at the end of 2019 until 2022, by these different forms of holographic energetic genetic overlay that people willingly went to get, so that they were made promises that this would give them solutions to what they were afraid of. I can't say it more specifically without choosing specific words. Why am I not talking with specific words? Because I'm avoiding thought forms here. We need to learn to understand what is being said without tapping into the collective agreed thought forms behind different ideas, because they are very distorted and full of all sorts of stuff now. Once you use a word, you connect to the thought form. So we must talk without connecting to these thought forms. In my book, The Souls of Humanity, I do talk about that, or is it the perception logs, which I haven't got out there. I got some information back there where there was a talk about how people would be promised something better if they just did that. And it was at the time not similar to what happened, because that is the typical one. We get promises similar to when we had the rolling out the event program. Everybody was saying the new reality is coming, everything is good, and we have rainbows on the sky and unicorns jumping around. No, they didn't say that, but almost. And people were saying, oh, the new world is coming, everything is good, and whatever, and the 5th dimension is here, and blah, blah, blah. And it has just since then just gone downhill, hasn't it? Okay, but there is always all of these explanations of why it has done and why it's not coming to fruition and fruition and all of these kind of things. There are always explanations of why it has not gone the way. And I could go on board with that and say, oh, why this or that or whatever. But that's the cognitive dissonance. We put out something, we hope, oh, this is what we want. And then it doesn't happen. We're trying to find explanation instead of just saying, okay, was I deceived? Was it a deception? Was I manipulated since I thought that? Instead of trying to make up reasons for why it has not happened. Then look at it and say, oops, I was wrong. And oops, I was probably manipulated to think that way. And that's part of the awakening process, to realize when we've got swooped away by the collective programs. And that happens quite often. These waves are very, very strong. And the methods they're using are definitely just as strong as the astral barrier. Okay, so the astral barrier has controlled humanity for 15,000 years, how we think and feel, the essence of our psyche. Again, the frequency fence is connected to more or less, it's higher up, and it's connected to the DNA, the human DNA, the core of the human DNA. Not as much our thought forms, but they are controlling what we call the reality field allowances for what type of thoughts that can be thought or think, the think tank. No, sorry, that was just a little jump, because the think tank, they are not under the same control of the frequency fence like the rest of us, so they can think outside the box, so to speak, or outside the enclosure. Just to put that in. So that's also important to understand. There are certain groups within our reality that are not under the same level of administration like the rest of the human population. Okay. So with that one understood, we also understand, okay, we have the body elemental that are connected to the current self, the current type of self or sense of self, ego structure, me, myself, I. And once we get that body elemental released, and then it no longer gets fed by our emotions and our thought processes, and we'll learn to silence our mind, and we'll learn to let the emotions just be there as they are, then we will understand there are other layers of emotions that are much, much deeper, or patterns that makes us respond in a different way. So let us again, sorry, I'm a little bit unclear here. Emotions are the electrochemical processes in the body and part of the body itself. So we will still, if we are allowing ourselves to be fully observable of our body and what our body does, it does flush through with different types of electrochemical processes we interpret as emotions. However we respond to them is when we begin to think about these different types of chemical processes. Then we will have a feeling, and then we'll begin to interpret what that is, and then we express it as a feeling. But if you really investigate when you have these emotional electrochemical processes, it is kind of a body discomfort. So if the body responds in a specific way, you get a stomach ache, or it feels or whatever. It's all of these bodily responses to some kind of external or internal input that kicks off the electrochemical processes. How we interpret that is part of our mind. So if we do mindfulness practice and meditation, then we learn to silence the mind so it doesn't jump in right away and give a narrative for these emotional expressions. And in that, we can begin to observe what happens in our body. The way we normally respond to these electrochemical processes are put in early childhood. That's part of the body elemental. These are the patterns of the psychological patterns that we have, the scheme, the mental schemes we have. That is the typical narrative we run in our brain that kicks in automatically, ingrained in our neural network, which we can clear in meditation contemplation and clear out the crystallization of belief systems. And this is how I normally interpret this to be, and reframe it in a manner so that it's more accurate with who and what we are today. So it always changes these narratives according to the situation. Not that we are making it up. Some of it is important, as in if I touch it in a specific way, it will hurt me. So of course I'm not doing that. But other types of ideologies, or what we could say is more mental constructions due to the programs of the world of how we're supposed to think and feel, these are the ones we can change and should change into be more accurate and more just observing without having an opinion. So we can say thought processes that are aligned with opinions and values and ideologies. These are the ones we should investigate and see if there's a little bit more conducive ways to be in the world where we're talking about, for instance, compassion and kindness, self-nurture, and work with the understanding of inclusivity and see things as they truly are so we know what we're dealing with. And the principles here that I align with and have given out there for all of you to enjoy or not. Principle 1 to 9. The first of many, balancing, law of participation, the law of reciprocity, the true inner knowledge, correct partnership, correct commitment, correct utilization of energy, and correct utilization of power. And I'm here just, they are integrated with the rules of engagement as well as the natural laws of energy. And that's the transition sciences and the template sciences where you get that. These are new frames of references that can give you new concepts to work with when you're retailoring your neural network into see the world in a different way. They're just foundational, but they can definitely be used to create some new thought forms. And then once you work your way through whatever layer you're working your way through, you can then discard them and see if there's something else that pops up that actually comes from your own holographic energetic architecture, and perhaps some of the systems you have been in contact with where worlds were operating in a different way, and perhaps you have lessons and knowledge, whatever you can use from there. And that's the true knowledge where you really begin to come in contact with all of the different existences you have had and what you learned there. Because knowledge is what we have experienced and learned and integrated and are now using to transform energy. How do we transform energy the best way? That's wisdom. And what do we transform it into? As in the highest good of the many, or the outmost highest standards of purity rate, or the progression dynamics, or that we all work as a team to figure out how to solve whatever's going on our planet. So this becomes the raw foundation of our narrative in the brain. Well, how does these higher thought forms align with the brute raw human emotionality? And that's still, I've got some very old patterns that pops up from time to time. From the past life of the Buddhist monk, I've had some very strong, due to the extreme amount of torture I went through, a lot of conflicting thoughts that were ingrained in a dark pattern because of what was done to me. And that's why we come under such lives where that happens to us, often instigated by that actually Chinese soldier that were from some of the same groups that we are now coming back in. So from the Orion system. So with that, we understand that some of our past life patterns are put there deliberately to pull us back into the enclosure, to keep us stuck in the enclosure, or to keep us connected to specific timelines inside the enclosure. And at the same time also creates a type of entity that fuels that patterns. Now, because it's a past life, then it's completely subconscious. So we have to work through our past lives as well, as we worked our way through our current lifetime, energetic psychodynamic patterns that have been created in this lifetime via the body elemental, to a little critter that I just got onto today that is behind, again in the solar plexus area, but close to the spine. Now, this is very interesting. First and foremost, I did an energy system reading the other day where I got access to when the emotional field was integrated into humanity. And that's now part of the energy system reading as a standard information, because that is the sign that the astral barrier is now completely dismantling, because now we get to the root of it. When we get to the root of something, then it means we're at the end stage of that clearing work. So today, actually began yesterday, I observed this very crystallized, this almost calcified critter that is an extension on the inside of my spine. It's not on the outside of my spine, but the inside, behind my intestines. And it's in the fourth dimension, of course. And it's crystallized. It's this kind of it's completely calcified. And it had these long tentacles out in my emotional field. And I was just kind of, what is that? I was just looking at it, and there are still remnants of it. But then I just began trying to remove it and clear it and blast it and all sorts of things, because you need to use whatever technique you have in your toolkit when you work with an entity you haven't seen before, especially one that's so old. It's like it's older than me. It's not body elemental. It's not from this life. And then the first layer I got of it is that thing is connected to the astral bear, the original programs. Okay, that's the first step. Then I also got, that's the one that gets transferred from life to life. And that's very, very interesting, because that means it's not a body elemental, but it's a piece of technology that keeps the sum of information from each lifetime. I think it's a karma bot. Can I call it that? A kind of karma entity that holds the information of quote unquote karma, or the distortion patterns that rules us from life to life and get us inserted. Aside from the affinity with our parents, these are the patterns that that sends out the signal that draws to a specific type of patterns of our parents. And that's super interesting. And, I'm very scientific here because it's at the same time horrible and all these kind of things and alien technology and whatnot. But as a scientist, this is super interesting. Okay. So investigating that further, then I can see all of this, and it's nasty to begin to work with, because this is literally the beacon, the bell, the computer of the distortion energies that ties us to the enclosure or the astral barrier. So since the astral barrier is now collapsing, then I can begin to explore the technology that has kept my emotional field and mental field, whether it was cleared from each lifetime, the body elemental was removed and everything, but there are still these raw codes that draws us back in and are part of engineering our cellular structure in the DNA that gets us from when the sperm and the egg cell from mom and dad, they are joined together. That's that thing. These codes are the ones that makes it into a baby. Isn't that interesting? That's super fascinating in my opinion. But it's really no longer, it's not wiggling, it's not active, it's just like this stationary piece of technology that used to be a living being, that used to probably be the first elementals that were used for the recirculation, and then later on it was no longer needed because they made extensions to the astral barrier, and then they came into just with what we could say a new entity, a new body elemental for each life, and no longer needed to tie back to the previous lives. Or it is just recording what's left of the previous lives and never supposed, that could be the calcification, a barrier so that it was there and priming our fields and drawing us to the specific patterns and life circumstances, but not to be actively engaged with, hence the calcification as a kind of a barrier, so it can't be accessed, but it's just there and controlling the fields at their core. I have not yet got completely rid of it. I got completely one layer and then it keeps popping up. So that means there's technology behind I haven't got access to yet. And the technology is pretty profound. I'm trying to go up above my head into the barrier. And then I first got a cube and that was not the accurate one. Then I got a sphere. That was not the accurate one. So I'm still working on it. So it just needs to go through and through and through until it's gone. And then the tentacles that goes out my emotional field are upholding what we call some really rigid patterns from past lives. And that's, if I am to give an assessment right now, I would say, well, these patterns are probably when I get, that's that. Either they are giving the information of the past life and plays it out so the patterns gets reinforced, or it's difficult to say. It kind of looks like this weird, the calcification, the core, and then it has tentacles or arms or energy cords out, and on each end of these, there are this weird, like, almost like when you look at an astrological chart, there are these symbols at the end of each one of them that some of them are still shining and some of them are dormant, some of them are dark and some of them are blue and I just need to, is that genetics, whatever, I haven't figured that one out yet. And then I'm thinking, I wonder if that's connected to the astrological chart, because the other day I kind of got an insight of how to make actually a variation of the astrological chart into not being from the perspective of the earth in the middle, but the sun in the middle, and not seeing it as a planetary system, but seeing it as a solar system, and onwards and so forth. But it kind of just got stuck there. But it followed with the idea of the different houses being the strands of DNA, so to speak, to use an expression that's been used in the 2000s, the different kind of consciousness potentials that we could activate through the different dimensions of our system as part of the Pillar Project. So that's an interesting insight. And perhaps that thing is there to prevent that from unfolding as it's supposed to. Anyways, I'll keep working with it. But the interesting thing here, and pay attention, is that the body elemental is to the current life. That's the sense of self. Get rid of that, and then you will be able to observe the different fluctuations of energies and how to respond to that in a proper manner in that situation. That does not mean that we can't get angry or feel love or whatever we're feeling, because these are still electrochemical processes to energies that are affecting us in different ways. So they're definitely there to be cleansed out, especially in times like this, where we can say, well, the collective energies have different types of vibrational patterns that we are also getting affected by. And then we respond to these things. And then it's up to us to figure out the best way to respond. And some of these patterns, and this is what's interesting for me, is that the patterns that go back to past lives, that are so ingrained and so very, very difficult to get a hold of because they're subconscious. Sometimes we're responding. And for instance, for me, working through the Buddhist thing was the Buddhist thing, just hear me, past life as a monk, there was so much anger. And first the anger was towards the ideology itself, which it wasn't, because I was not even schooled in the Theravada tradition. So it was something schooled in something completely else. So anyway, so that didn't add up. So where did that anger come from? And then it went into the scenery of the end of my days. And then I began to explore that and go in, and were bold enough to go in and experience not to the gory details, but enough to understand, nobody would get out of that without being severely scattered. So what was the purpose of that? Okay, time into the dark timelines. Okay, what is the anchor to that timeline? What is in, and then finding the entity, the energetic parasite, and work with the pattern and erase that and get rid of that, run it again and again and again through the purple, the blue, the gold, and the white. I talk about that other places as well. I think it's the high order senses courses where I use that technique, and just go through it again and again and again until it either dustifies or turn into just a golden piece of blob that either then gets pulled out or just evaporates, or it just balances itself out and just becomes this pure sound and then vanishes, because it's whatever's there is a portion of me that no longer exists. So it kind of needs to just be let go of, like everything else. So with that, then the anger was gone, because the anger was technically, it was mine, because at some point I did get it. You can only hold compassion for so long in such a situation. Let me put it that way. No matter how skilled you are, at some point you break. Especially when we're talking about not just 1 day or 2 days, we're talking months and months and months and months, if not years, under that kind of circumstances, until you literally die. And then at that moment, when you have a prison keeper that does that to you, that energy, that eighth dimensional Orion type of very, very unpleasant energy, then eventually imprints. And then that goes into the splintering of the soul, literally, that happens. The holographic energetic structure splinters, the body elemental splinters, everything splinters under these circumstances. And then all of these fragments are then susceptible for that new configuration of quote unquote darkness that then takes it over and becomes that blob of anger or blob of something that runs us subconsciously, that ties us to the third cycle dark configuration. Okay. So these are some of the understandings that we need to go through when we're working with our past lives. And then, of course, the trick is, not the trick, but the method, the work, what we need to do is, of course, to figure out how to clear it and then let it go. And the interesting thing is, once we get there, then these situations that normally would stir up that anger then dissipates. Because it's kind of, that's where the law of reciprocity comes in. What we are will be mirrored from the outside in different types of situations, so that we can learn to administer our emotional and mental and energetic fields in a manner that is conducive for all involved. And sometimes that conduciveness is within principle 2, the correct balancing point, and you need to listen to the transition sciences to understand what that really means. Okay, So with that said, I got my work cut out for me. But the reason why I'm putting it out here is that if that is happening to me now, we could say, okay, it's because I got through the Buddhist monk past life and I got to the anger, I got rid of the dark entity that was attached to me from that lifetime, I got it dispersed and things have healed. And then that's because I can see that. But I think it's more aligned with the fact that the incoming groups, they have no interest in the astral barrier, whatever was left, and they have now put out what we call pulses, because I heard that, to break down all of that old technology. The event program is still playing its role, because that's an agreement they have made with the parallel universal matrix. But everything that was part of the old world order is now breaking down. And this is where many people who have the big hope of the better future in their mind's eye, and they are bewildered by the hope and not really seeing things as they truly are, they would jump to the conclusion as if these groups are here to make things better because they're breaking down the old world order. And it sounds enticing, and I will keep it, open-minded. But since I'm seeing the groups that are coming in, I'm kind of saying, okay, I cannot really align what you are, where you come from, what the behavior you have, and what you normally do when you enter into a system, with the idea of something is getting better. Let me put it that way. Because as for my end and where I'm looking at things, not really. But I will do my best to just, I can't even play that game. Whatever is coming is worse than was before. Let me just put it that way. And you can say, well, Randi, that's because you see things from this cynical, very harsh, bleak level of reality. And you can be absolutely right. And please prove me wrong. But from where I'm standing, since 2012, things has just gone downhill. And we can hope and say, okay, if all the programs of the old world order are now completely collapsing, then something better must come. And we can hope that the Andromedan infusions will assist us in that and pump in energies to the core of our planet. So those of us who wants to really get into what we call the elder races of the 8th dimension, as well as the original ways of working with the true power of the 9th dimension that was part of our pillar project, again, go into the transition sciences, template sciences, reconfigurations, the whole academy courses you can work your way through and see what was the purpose of the correct use of energy and correct use of power, and what were we able to do with them in the original solar system configuration. So that's the goal of us. We say now that the 8th is there from the other side, well, that allows for us to access that level on what we call the original progressive side. So I will focus on that. But it's not because this is where it gets so complex when we talk polarity forces, because people don't always get that in times of great darkness, there can also be great lightness or brightness. So that's the dynamic we need to understand, that one thing comes in and shows us the ugly faces, like a Janus mask. You have one that is laughing and one that's crying. So you have the one side there that pushes the general population in one level, but that allows you to go in a complete opposite direction. And as far as I can sense from these groups, as it always is whenever the different forces of the polarity kicks in, they need that polarity. But it again, is it going to be a control like it was with what was left of the right-hand path? Or is it going to be something where they will just give us free reins so we can do whatever we want to do, because then they can do whatever they want to do. And that pushes us into the principles. And that's why the councils gave me the incentive to do this and backed me up energetically and made sure that I could do these teachings, so that we understood that if we follow by the principles, principle 9 to 12, the laws of energy utilization principle, or rules of engagement, all 1 to 12, again, whole academy free material, go through there, you get it there, then we will have the right foundation to be able to do the path of liberation and get out of the enclosure, because it's dismantling around us. But we are doing it in a time of what we could say great darkness. So with that come, we must follow the original ways to really get to the point where we actually can play out the correct opposition and the correct polarity to these forces. And for me, that's the challenge that we have the next many years. Okay, so with that said, I think that's it for now. Thank you.